I'm Peter Kaufman from Read Russia. Thank you very much for joining the grand finale of Russian Literature Week this week. We've had a very active and productive series of events online, and truly they've been wonderful. I see some friends and participants from other meetings this week in our conversation today. Let me introduce our speakers, but before I do, please let me remind you of the Zoom protocols. What are the Zoom protocols? Please put questions and comments in the chat if you can. Keep yourselves muted if that's possible. And we'll leave time for conversation, I am sure. We're delighted to be joined today by Boris Dralyuk, Alex Fleming, and Maxim Osipov. Boris is a literary translator and the editor-in-chief of the Los Angeles Review of Books. He is co-editor with Robert Chandler and Irina Mashinski of the Penguin Book of Russian Poetry, editor of 1917, Stories and Poems from the Russian Revolution, and 10 Poems from Russia, and translator as well of Isaac Babel, Andrey Kurkov, Maxim Osipov, Leo Tolstoy, Mikhail Zoshchenko, and other authors. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in the new Criterion, the New York Review of Books, the Yale Review, Jewish Quarterly, First Things, the Hopkins Review, and elsewhere. Alex Fleming joining us. Hello, Alex. We haven't met before. Is a literary translator from Russian and Swedish. Her translations include works by Maxim Osipov, Katrine Marçal, Camilla, Sten, and Kayo, Mpoyi, and have been featured in Asymptote, Litro Magazine, Literary Hub, and Image Journal, among others. She's co-editor of the Swedish Book Review, a journal of new writing in translation from the Swedish-speaking world. And Maxim Osipov, thank you very much for joining us from Russia today. Maxim is a Russian writer and also a cardiologist, so uniquely the one medical professional joining us in discussions of Russian literature during the pandemic. His short stories and essays have won a number of prizes, and his plays have been staged and broadcast on the radio in Russia. His fiction and his nonfiction have been collected in 6 Russian language volumes and translated into 18 languages. His debut collection in English, Rock, Paper, Scissors, and Other Stories, translated by Boris, Alex, and Anne-Marie Jackson, appeared in April 2019 from NYRB Classics. Upon return, in the early 1990s, he was a research fellow at the University of California, San Francisco, and upon returning to Moscow, he continued to practice medicine, co-authored a textbook on clinical cardiology, and founded a publishing house, as people do, all those things together, Practica, which specializes in medical, musical, and theological material. After moving to Tarusa, a town 101 kilometers from Moscow, Maxim began working at the local hospital, and he also established a charitable foundation to ensure the hospital's survival and to improve its standard of care. For those just joining, it's a great pleasure to be able to present these 3 speakers. And just one more word, there have been a number of conversations during Russian Literature Week about the importance of prescribing Russian literature to people during the pandemic. But perhaps the best line so far, I forget which day it was, but Gary Saul Morrison turned to Morty Shapiro, the president of Northwestern, as they were thinking about how to pack Chekhov in with the vaccine so that everybody could get a little of both. Who do we know at Pfizer, Morty? And that's just the winning question so far. Please, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that kind introduction. I assure you, we know no one at Pfizer, even though we're the most medically equipped panel. I think what I'd like to do is, first of all, thank you all for joining us today. It's wonderful to see familiar faces and familiar names, and I hope you'll all participate in the chat. It's very good to be able to speak to Maxim face to face, although without without meeting in the same room, and to see Alex, with whom I only correspond over email. So what I'd like to do is to begin by asking both Maxim and Alex whether they've registered a phenomenon that I've registered, which is that the pandemic has triggered an outpouring of writing, a really tremendous amount of writing. But most of it that at least reaches me at my desk at the LA Review of Books is in the form of essays and poems. I don't see much fiction coming out of this moment yet, and I'm wondering whether that's something that you two have observed, Alex.
I think it is something that I've observed, though I might add that I think there's definitely been an outpouring of more speculative fiction inspired by the pandemic. I think you and Maxime are probably better placed to speak on the writing process during the pandemic and how that has affected things. As a reader, my impression is probably that we're still in the sort of speculative fiction range of things. There's because we can't quite see an arc out of it yet, I suppose. We don't have that sort of space for a more expansive kind of exploration of our current situation. And of course, the beautiful thing about literature is that we can sort of, or a book that was maybe 2 centuries or written 2 centuries ago can still speak to us in a way that a book written a year ago might not. It's what kind of we bring to the text that we're reading. But I completely agree with you that there has been a real outpouring of nonfiction and incredible, like, heart-stopping nonfiction and poetry at this time. But yeah,
absolutely, and it's exactly right what you say about books written 2 centuries ago. I've now read about 50 reflections on Defoe, having not even touched Defoe in ages. It is a moment to rediscover classics that can teach us a thing or two about the current moment. And Maxime, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that war literature has always been not always, but mainly, almost always, has been written after the war, not during the war. Or let us say, it's hard to write a love story being inside this story. So we are still in the story of COVID. So poetry or essays that you mentioned, in fact, I didn't read much, but nevertheless, I am not a great reader. So they can deal with feelings, but to write a prose, you need something more than feelings. I think that's why, I guess.
Yes, that makes sense. I do think that what Alex said about that arc is very telling. We don't know where this is going yet, where it will end, and maybe that's partly what inspired your text of the pandemic, which is fiction of a sort, but it's a series of satirical sketches. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, Maxime, and tell us what went into that process.
Well, I wrote and published 5 very short stories, exceptionally short for me. And I think that in time of disaster, it is the best thing one can do is not to scare his or her neighbors. So in order to cheer people up, to encourage them, I wrote this satirical feuilletons, you can say. So when the number of obituaries on my Facebook page exceeded a certain value, I stopped doing that. So that's it took me about 2 months to the whole process. And right now I'm writing an essay on how I myself was vaccinated, which was very Russian and very funny in a way.
Well, let's get to the chase. Tell us about it. I think we're all very eager to hear about vaccines right now. What was that process like?
Well, you know much, I guess, about Russian vaccine. It hasn't been tested properly. It was the effectiveness was unclear. The number of side effects was unclear, and of course, it was very Russian way to do that. It was semi-secretly. I really felt uneasy whether I should do that or I should wait for some Western vaccine. Since I cannot lock myself up, I have to go to the hospital, and my son was sick, and there was a lot of COVID around us here in Tarusa. So I decided to do that, and then when I got there, well, it was a long story. It was like when you feel thirsty and you see the glass with liquid. Is it a water? Well, if you are in the cafe, yes, probably then yes. If you are in the garage, could be something else, right? So I was very indecisive, but then I got there to this polyclinics, and they said, although it was, agreed that I come at certain point, do this and that, and they said, well, there is no vaccine for you. We are out of vaccines. We vaccinated 80 people before you, and then we are. So then really I felt I should have been vaccinated. And I said, well, look, you are a doctor, I'm a doctor. We all know very well that when something is over, it's not over completely over. There are some more vaccines somewhere. And so, yeah, they said, yes, there are a couple more. So I got this vaccine, and, thanks God, I feel good.
Yeah, there's nothing like scarcity to inspire desire.
Yeah, well,
and Alex, are you have you been reading much Swedish literature about the pandemic?
To be honest, I haven't. I'm not one of those people that sort of leans into the current situation, as that was discussed in one of the talks earlier this week. I'm more of a person to sort of distract myself in any way possible. And to be honest, there hasn't been that much. Again, there are some sort of thrillers just starting to come out, I feel, but there hasn't been like a huge amount of directly COVID related fiction. There have been a few books that were just ridiculously timed, that happen to deal with pandemics that are just coming out now in Sweden, but that were planned sort of long before, that I've been hearing about, but I've been sort of consciously avoiding them, I think, so far.
You and I tend to talk about Maxim's stories as we're translating them. So you'll send me a draft, and then we'll have a conversation about it. This is an opportunity to talk about the satirical stories, because we really haven't had a chance. You haven't really been involved in translating those. I've translated a couple. Have you had a chance to look at them?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
No, and I do think that is the sort of, especially in, that is the sort of fiction, besides the more speculative thing that has been coming through, and especially in countries like Russia and Italy, where there was a sort of much stricter lockdown than there has been here, or in Sweden, for example. There was a lot more sort of wit, one might call it, the sort of fiction on the everyday in my little box or sort of square, and that I loved Maxim's sketches. I thought they were great.
Yeah, I love them too. When I first read them, when Maxim sent them to me, and one thing that struck me was how cannily they address the wavering that we've all felt in the early days, going back and forth between taking the thing seriously and not taking it seriously, the frustrations, and also the role of social media in our lives, which now these screens have taken over completely our modes of communication. But Maxim was right there on the cutting edge, kind of predicting the disruptive and the malformation of our social life that these things were going.
That was really what struck me the first time I read them, that there's a punch at the end of each kind of sketch that it relates to social media, and it really hit home the first time that I read it.
We're trying to save the suspense for those who haven't read them yet, but a very nice twist ends most of these stories. The first story that I read was very much about Facebook and about misinformation and fake news. And Maxim and I, when we were just chatting earlier, he had mentioned that the new laws against fake news have had a kind of an impact on the way people have communicated about this virus. And maybe Maxim can say a little bit more about that.
Well, that's very, very dangerous and scary thing. My friends were being hit by these new laws. When you try to report, for example, these days, some adverse effects of vaccination, they could really come to you, and this is a part of criminal law now. So doctors are scared. We all are scared. This is really not funny at all.
No. There's something, I tend to feel the same way as you, Maxim. I always want to lighten the mood when the conversation turns to something serious. So I thought maybe I'd read a paragraph from one of your sketches, and it's a bit of a puzzle, and I wonder whether people will recognize the subject. May I share it, Maxim? This is I'll spoil the surprise a little bit. The letters are chain letters. It's in the title, you should know. And this is one of the characters in one of these letters. One man, when the pandemic began, locked himself up at his dacha near Moscow. He refused to go out and received no visitors. His wife had left him long ago, and his dog, a Labrador, had died. On the topic of his daughters, both grown married women, he prefers to remain silent. He needs no one and is needed by no one. There's no sense in wishing him anything, and no need to share a story. That, to me, the Labrador was the giveaway. I don't know if anyone else has cracked the riddle, but you can share it in the chat if you'd like. And when did you write these? The last of these letters, Maxim?
Well, it was May, I think.
Wow, very early.
Well, interestingly, in Russia, most people didn't recognize the character of the story. I shall give it away. It's about Putin, but people during this pandemics, they completely forgot about our president, and that was one of the interesting political features. And I would say in spring, there was some sense of freedom that we did not experience for a while. Now it's almost gone, I would say. But it was a special time this spring.
Mm-hmm. And it was also tied to some other events and led to some other political events. We tend to focus on the pandemic. This is the stated topic of this panel and of this week, but it's also been a year of remarkable political developments, some happy and some less so. And I know, Maxim, you've been watching all of these things transpire. What has moved you most, and what has elicited most of your sympathy and excitement?
Well, I would say Belarus, definitely. We are all very much excited. I know that in the US it is not covered as much as it deserved coverage. And of course, US election, which was also, I obviously I am very glad the way it went. The thing I'm not happy about that is that Trump got a lot of support, and if not COVID, probably he would be reelected, right? But I'm here, you know, I'm an outsider. I'm not to discuss U.S. election. But as for Belarus, well, and of course Armenia was very very difficult. I have friends. I have been translated into Armenian, so I have Armenian translator who was a volunteer during this war, although he's 53, a bit late to fight. Yeah. But and of course the defeat of Armenians was very sad thing. But as for Belarus, we still hope. We still hope. I think it's unique, this kind of protest, the peace protest, and if not Putin, Lukashenko would have gone already for sure. But we will see. We will see.
Yes.
How it goes.
Alex, I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, which is the fact that we tend to go back to classics at moments like this. And one thing that I've always appreciated about Maxim's stories, and I know that you and I have worked hard to get this right, is that they're loaded with literary allusions. That in many of his narrators, lines of poems that aren't necessarily obvious to most readers are just occur to them and pop into the text. And it's our challenge to make sure that it's recognizably a line from Pushkin or recognizably a line from a less well-known poet. And even these satirical stories are also very dense with allusions, so I'm wondering what you've gone back to. What are the allusions in your mind as all of this is unfolding? What have you been reading?
Well, so again, my thing is that I've been kind of actively avoiding the obvious sort of pandemic or war or whatever related novels. And it's actually confession time, because this is the first year that I've read what I'm still working on, but War and Peace in Russian. So that has been sort of taking me a little while. But I've really enjoyed that process. Otherwise, a lot of the fiction that I've been reading lately has been more contemporary fiction. I was actually reading Alexei Salnikov, Petrovy v Gripe и вокруг него, like just as the first cases were kind of trickling in. And of course, that sort of, it's about the flu. And that sort of took on a very different light in the light of everything else that was going on around me. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what other classics I've delved into, but like March, April, in fact, in March, April, it feels so long ago, but I know that I was reading very little at the time, except for sort of rolling news cycles, because my concentration span was just terrible. But that's one of the few benefits that's come out of this time, is that it's actually kind of severed my connection or need to watch the news, or sort of to kind of my dependence on that sort of instant update and instant sort of gratification from that. And so it has been good in that sense to kind of turn away from quick reads and onto sort of more slower enjoyment of things.
And in fact, I've been doing much the same. I actually am stuck in a cycle of very small texts. Partly that's my job, but also I think that's what I'm drawn to. So it's been very good to have a very long story by Maxim to translate, because that's something into which I can really sink, which I've been doing. And I know you and I are both working on longer stories right now. Maxim. And Maxim, what classics have occurred to you in this time? One of the characters in your sketches spends most of his time reading Brockhaus and Ephron encyclopedias, but which sounds like a pretty good recommendation right now. But what have you been reading?
Well, right now I'm reading something completely different. I'm reading book which I really love. It's a translation from German of Sebastian, his name is Sebastian Hafner. And the book is a story, История одного немца, a story of a German. And it has been written in 1939 and is full of predictions and observations, and it's a story of a Germany from 1914 till 1939, and this is a very good book. I strongly recommend it. I'm sure it's translated into English, so I strongly recommend it to everybody. The author lived a very long life, and he died in Germany in 1990 or something, and he wrote a lot of books. I just discovered this author. And as for classics, interestingly, the relations between people here in Tarusa especially became very tense because we all, it's mainly it's dacha people, summer people, but these people are locked here for the whole year. And so I broke with my friends because she offended Prince Andrey from War and Peace.
War and Peace.
And I was really offended. She said very ugly things about him. And I must say, I told her, I know Prince Andrey much longer than I know you, and I really feel I should protect him from you. And the second thing was when she said something ugly about Pushkin, and then I said, okay, now it's over. So that how classics affects our lives, really strange.
Absolutely.
But this is the answer that I gave once to children, not children, adolescents, when one of them I met with a class of 15-year-old or something, and one of them asked me quite aggressively, "Why should I read War and Peace? I'm going to become an economist or I don't know, lawyer. Why do I need this this huge book?" And I said, well, first of all, there are 80 characters. How many people you know? Maybe 20, 30. How many of them you know well? Just very few. But there are 80 characters whom will be your whom you would know all your life. So it would really broaden your spectrum of friends or enemies first. And second, when you at certain point you would have to offend, to выгнать, how to say that, to
chase out or to send
out
away.
your father-in-law, for example. You would remember Pierre, who was doing that to Vasily, and that would somehow encourage you to do that. Or if your grandmother or father would die from stroke, and you would suddenly think, oh, it should happen faster now. It rather, and you would be scared from thinking this way. You would remember Princess Maria, who was thinking the same way, and she's one of the most beloved characters of this novel. So it's all here. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Does that resonate with you, Alex?
Sorry, yeah, no, I was just going to actually ask, we've focused a lot on reading during this time, but I was wondering if you've experienced that your writing process has changed at all. Both of you, I guess I can direct that to you.
I don't write much, and I've never been writing much. Well, I didn't write much. right now I'm quite busy with this medical things, and I'm editing a medical translation of very famous medical textbook. It keeps me busy, but I hope I will write something. Uh, but let me not share it with a bigger audience right
Yes.
away.
You know, it's interesting. I had the story that I'm working on right now of yours actually has a wonderful little passage about translating medical texts and working on translations of medical texts that is actually a lesson for all translators, a lesson about clarity and avoiding cliches. And this is something we haven't talked about before, but do you feel that your experience with Practica had actually helped you as a writer of creative fiction?
Well, I think, yes, I think it did. Well, at least it affected it. I am not sure how helpful it was, but definitely this experience was very, very important.
And I do see that Peter has encouraged people to post questions in the chat. I want to do the same. If you have any questions, just leave them in the chat, and I'll pose them. And this is all by way of avoiding Alex's question of how this has affected my writing. Really, what has happened is I had anticipated, and I'm sure that many people here feel the same way. I had anticipated that I would have much more time to do translating and to work on my passion projects, but that has not been the case. Being stuck at home does not necessarily translate into having more time for creative efforts. So that's been my experience. A roundabout way of answering that question. And Alex, when translating from Swedish and from Russian at the same time, more or less, kind of with one hand in the other, does that bring up certain parallels, or do the two languages interfere with one another at all? I've always wanted to know that.
No, I mean, the two languages are so, it's more likely that the Swedish will interfere with my English than the Swedish will interfere in my translation of Russian into English. And I actually try to emulate my process in translating Russian to English more in my translation of Swedish, because it's so syntactically similar that it's quite, or not syntactically similar, but it's so kind of grammatically similar to English that it is easy to just kind of go on autopilot. Whereas with Russian, I do find myself kind of getting deeper into the sounds and the rhythms and the syntax from a much earlier stage in the process. So I do try to kind of move more towards my Russian practice when I'm translating Swedish. But it's nice to have that kind of. Sometimes I do. It's because I might translate from both languages in the same day, and so it's quite easy to get confused between the two texts that I'm translating. And sometimes there are these strange parallels between the sort of the things that I'm working on a story by Maxim at the moment that involves a lot of chess. And there was a chapter in a book that I was recently translating that also involved a lot of chess, and it was just difficult for me to kind of remember what had been said in one and what had been said in another, even though they were completely different books. But I love that kind of serendipity of translation.
This happens to me when I'm translating and editing, and I usually have to do that on the same day. And quite recently, I was top editing a piece on mathematics, and in one of Maxim's stories, in the story that I'm currently translating, there is a long formula, and I got the numbers completely jumbled. I couldn't see where the brackets were at all by the end of it. Now I see there are some very, very good questions here in the chat, so I'll pose them out loud and direct them at the person to whom they're posed. So the first question is from Mikhail Kurkov to Maxim. Are you surprised to see your writing appear in English translation? Did you ever expect to see your writing in English?
Well, I'm not surprised at all. I put substantial efforts for this to happen. And I was expecting it, and it happened. I'm very glad that New York Review of Books, which is a great publisher, I think, they picked it up, and that they will have the second book as well. So I'm not surprised. But I'm very, very glad. I can see that there is another question, Boris.
Yes, Nora Seligman-Favorov asks to Maxim, has being translated, interacting with your translators affected how you write or led to some sorts of insights about your writing?
Well, I hope it doesn't interact, because there is a thing when you start thinking of how that would be translated into English or any other language, then it would lead to so-called world literature, when the writers write having this in mind. I think it's a dangerous thing, and I try to avoid it. But then at the end of, after working on each story, I put, Alex and Boris know that very well, I put a lot of footnotes in order to help them, and in order to clarify myself some, sources of quotes, difficult words, difficult situations, to just, to avoid unnecessary searches, guessing, because sometimes something looks like proverb, but in fact it isn't. I invented it myself. Something is from Bible, something is from Pushkin. So then I start thinking, but the story is over, so I do not change it, never. But I must say I'm very, very happy to work with my English translators, and they know about it.
We do. He makes it clear, and we're very grateful. We're very happy to work with him as well. So the questions are coming thick and fast. I'll just say one thing before I go into the next question, which is that the notes are extraordinarily helpful and well beyond the phase of translation. Just recently, we were subjected to some fact checking. A story of Maxim's is going to be published in a very good journal, and instead of having to chase down these facts that were checked, I just went back to the footnotes and copied and pasted right into the fact check question. So very, very handy. The next question is from Julia. How does being a doctor feed into your writing and vice versa? My PhD thesis was on medicine in interwar Russian and Czech literature and cinema. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the figure of the doctor writer, but I can't ask Bulgakov, Veresayev, or Vanchura how they felt. I have had to infer. It would be lovely to know what you think. If this question has already been asked, please ignore it. It has not.
Well, I think that everything helps writing, but writing doesn't help my medical profession, definitely. So I work as a doctor only part-time these days. But if I were, let's say, a captain or a chemist, I would have another set of metaphors, probably. But I think it should not be exaggerated, the influence of medicine onto writers. So that's, briefly my answer. Yeah, I would be happy if I would be happy to write more and send me an email. We can exchange. Yeah.
Thank you. That would be fantastic.
Excellent. Shelley reminds us that we can always look to Russian genre fiction for quick and readable responses to the pandemic. And I'm afraid to follow the link. I hardly ever follow links in chats, but right now I'm following it. It's Anton Chij. Okay. Next is a question from Herb Randall, a question from Maxim. Is writing for you a completely separate world from your day job in medicine? For example, do people, and day job is in quotes because you obviously don't work full time as a medical practitioner. For example, do people who you meet in your medical work know that you are a published writer? And conversely, do you have friends there who primarily know you as a writer and not a doctor?
Yes, of course, I do have friends who primarily knows me as a writer, and I try to keep it separate, of course, and I hate when some of my patients bring me the book to write. I really feel ashamed, because doctor has no age, no biography, no sex, no nothing, you know. And as a writer, I have all these features, and so really I feel like I'm naked when somebody brings me a book of mine. So, but thanks God that I really treat here very, very common people who do not read much. So it doesn't happen very often.
And the next question from Thomas is, the contemporary Russian lit scene appears to be extremely vibrant at the moment. And how does it seem to you? Are there any limiting factors suppressing it or encouraging, nurturing elements at the moment?
We are talking about censorship, right? About this kind of thing.
Both, I think both what is encouraging writing and the nature of the scene, how lively it is, as well as what forces are working against it. And that could include censorship, but also other forces like the pandemic itself, I'm sure.
Well, I prefer not to blame the scene if I am not if I'm ineffective, or you know. So yes. It's hard to say. I never. There are writers who still remember times where the print runs of major Russian literary magazines were 3 million copies. You know, things like that. Now, same magazines have print runs of 3,000 copies or 2,000 copies. But I started writing when it was like that. So I don't think that literature is now in the center of people's attention or whatever. Cinema replaced it. You know, all this kind of things. But you know, what can I do about that? I prefer to concentrate on what I am doing.
Yes. Yeah.
Not the circumstances. And I must say that since the print runs are so small, there is really no censorship yet. You cannot express openly your opinions on Russian television. You cannot do it even in the theater. There is censorship because it is supported by the state. But as a writer, I can write and publish whatever I really want. So far.
Well, we're hitting the 50-minute mark. If there are any questions, please do share them. If not, I'd like to ask Alex and Maxim both what they're, I mean, Maxim doesn't want to speak about what he's currently working on, but I'll ask Alex what she's currently translating, and then I'll say what I'm currently translating.
Sure. Well, I am still working on more of Maxim's stories for the next forthcoming collection. And then otherwise from the Swedish, I'm actually working on a non-fiction book, which is about gender roles and how they sort of shape our society, but mainly from the point of view of shaping our economy and tech, and how we view our history of tech, which has been really great to work on.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been quite nice having that sort of very varied work at the moment, and a nice distraction from the very dark evenings and very boring situation right now in London.
Yes.
But yes. And you,
Boris? I'm working on the last of the stories as well for this collection, called Luxembourg. Not the Luxembourg you're thinking of, but Rosa, and most of you probably are thinking of the country. It's a wonderful, long, probably one of the longest pieces that Maxim has written, really very much a novella length work, and I'm sinking into it. And in a way, I'm dragging my feet because saying goodbye to it means saying goodbye to this book. and I really don't want to. It'll be some time before Maxim writes another book, so I'll have to savor this while I can. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, and thank you, Maxim, for joining us from Tarusa. This has been really great to meet face to face again, and thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank the three of you just unbelievably deeply. And I just want to say that Russian Literature Week this year has been an experiment. I don't know whether it's been a scientific experiment, but it's been some kind of experiment, all online. And ordinarily we have, events in New York at clubs and at bookstores and at libraries and universities with a little vodka, some zakuski. This is tough, but just to show you that we can make do. Here's a here's a bottle. It's not as early here as it is in Los Angeles. But I just wanted to thank you and say that I think we should be doing more of these and not wait until next December, especially during the pandemic and the winter. As Alex, you're talking about, it gets dark pretty quickly where you are. So yeah, we should think about new experiments in that regard. We're trying to put on our thinking caps over here, come up with new ideas, maybe online courses about Russian literature open to everyone, and a few other things. Please send ideas in, feel free. I don't know, we'll have the chat open longer than 1 o'clock today, but maybe on Twitter.
Well, anything that brings this assortment of people into the same room is a good thing. So it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to watch and participate from so far away.
Thank you, and thank you, Maxim, for your great work. Be careful what you wish for, Boris. May reach out to you even before the day is over.
Oh gosh. I won't ignore your email this time, I promise.
That's right, exactly.
Okay.
Anybody with any final questions, comments, concerns? All right, well, this has been very hopeful indeed, and a great pleasure. Have a great
thank you.
And thank you for joining us this week. Bye.
Have a good evening wherever you are.
Thank you, organizing.
Thank you.